You walk down into a basement on a sharp February morning, and your boots hit 3 inches of freezing, stagnant water. The air smells of wet drywall, rusted iron, and the sharp metallic tang of well water that has no business being outside the pipe. Upstairs, a modern homeowner is frantic on the telephone, waiting on hold for an emergency plumber who charges $300 just to turn his truck around in the driveway, while the ceiling below the bathroom begins to sag like wet cardboard. It is a common scene today, a grand, expensive disaster that swallows a month's wages in an hour. And yet, near every one of these costly ruins could have been headed off for the price of a copper washer and 10 minutes of quiet looking. We have been taught to treat the pipes behind our walls like a dark mystery, something only a licensed man with a truck full of specialized tools can touch. But the old people knew better. I am Elias, and I keep up this Lancaster County place with my own hands, the way my people always have. Out here, a body fixes his own troubles, or they stay unfixed. My father used to walk our cellar lines every autumn with a small stub of tallow candle and an old brass wrench, looking for the tiny white crust of lime that forms where a joint is just starting to think about weeping. He would say, there are two kinds of men in this world. The man who waits for his house to fall down around him so he can pay dear to mend it, and the man who tends his things in the quiet months so they never have the chance to break. The second man lives an easier, freer, and richer life, even if his pockets are no deeper than his neighbor's. This is not about some grand, secret trade knowledge that requires a university degree to understand. It is simply about the small, faithful tending that keeps the great breakdown from ever coming. It is the whole heart of how the old people kept a home standing for 200 years. A thing tended in small ways never falls to a large ruin. Now, I must be honest with you right from the start. What I am going to share with you today will not mend a copper line that has already split wide open from a hard black frost. It will not magically pull a heavy iron root out of a main sewer line that has been neglected for 40 years. If your house is already drowning, you must turn the key and call for help. But if your pipes are whole today, these 15 traditional ways of looking and tending will keep them that way for the rest of your days. Modern engineering firms now publish massive, complicated manuals on what they call predictive maintenance, using vibrations and sensors to guess when a machine will fail. The old-timers didn't have sensors, but they had eyes, ears, and a deep respect for the slow, steady ways that nature wears a thing down. Stop and think about your own home for a moment. Why is it that we willingly pay hundreds of dollars every few years for a man to come out and twist a valve or clear a line that we could have minded ourselves for pennies? We do it because we have lost the habit of looking. We have been conditioned to wait for the flood. But how did our great-grandfathers keep their homesteads running with nothing but lead, iron, and leather washers? They did it by understanding the pressure and the flow. Take the first and most important matter of all, the main water shutoff valve. It sits down there in the dark, usually where the cold iron pipe pierces the foundation stone, or out in a concrete pit near the road if you live down south, where the dirt never freezes solid. Most folks never look at it until the morning a washing machine hose splits and begins pumping 40 gallons of water a minute into the drywall. You run down the stairs in the dark, your heart knocking against your ribs. You grab that old iron wheel and you throw your weight against it, and it does not move. It is frozen fast, seized solid by 10 years of calcium and iron scale that has grown inside the threads like rust on an old gate hinge. A burst pipe with a working shutoff is an hour of mopping and a bit of bother. A burst pipe with a seized shutoff is $20,000 in structural ruin, and a family living out of a suitcase for a month. Understand this. A valve is a living thing in a house, and like any joint, if it sits dead still for 5 winters, it will die in its sleep. The old way, the way that costs nothing but 3 minutes of your time, is a simple yearly exercise. You go down to that valve on the exact same day every autumn. perhaps when the first frost hits the pumpkin vines. You grip the iron wheel, and you turn it down steady until the flow dies. Then you back it off, turn it again, and leave it clean. That single movement scrapes the soft mineral crust off the internal brass gate before it can harden into stone. It keeps the path free. And then there is the quiet thief that lives in the back of nearly every home in the country. The running toilet. You lie in bed at 3 in the morning, and through the floorboards you hear that faint, silvery hiss, a tiny, steady whistle of water moving through the dark. Most folks roll over and think nothing of it, promising themselves they will look into it when the weekend comes. But that little trickle is a small river. It can slide 200 gallons of clear water straight down into the dirt every single day, printing a water bill at the end of the month that looks like a mortgage payment. The ancient Romans wrote laws about the waste of water from their aqueducts, punishing citizens whose private pipes leaked into the streets because they understood that a small constant flow is more powerful than a sudden storm. Today, we simply pay the bill and grumble. The cause is nearly always a simple round piece of rubber called a flapper, sitting at the bottom of the porcelain tank, growing soft and slimy as it rots in the water. A new one costs less than a loaf of bread and takes no more than 15 minutes to set in place with your bare fingers. But the trouble is, many of these leaks are completely silent. The water slips past the seal so smoothly you cannot hear the hiss, and you have no notion you are losing 100 gallons a day until your well pump burns out from the constant labor. There is a beautiful, simple test for this that my grandfather used on every cistern and tank on our farm, long before anyone ever heard of home inspection companies or digital leak detectors. It uses nothing but a simple household item you likely have sitting in a kitchen cupboard right now, and it reveals the hidden truth of that porcelain tank within 30 minutes. Without turning a single wrench or spilling a single drop of water on your floor, you simply open the tank, perform this old check, and watch what happens in the bowl below. You take a small bottle of ordinary blue food coloring from the pantry shelf, the kind the women use to tint the icing for spring cakes. Lift the heavy porcelain lid off the back of the toilet tank and set it down flat on a rug so it does not crack against the floorboards. Look down into that clear water. You squeeze 10 or 12 drops of that deep blue ink straight into the tank, right over the mechanism, and you watch it bloom. It spreads through the water like a dark cloud in a clear sky, turning the whole tank the color of a summer lake. Now, you step away. Do not flush the handle. Do not let anyone touch the handle for 30 minutes. Go sit by the window, drink a cup of coffee, and look out at the yard. When the half hour is up, go back and look deep into the toilet bowl itself. If that bowl water remains as clear as mountain glass, your rubber flapper is tight and true. But if you see even the faintest streak of blue ribboning through the water, or if the whole bowl has taken on a pale sky tint, you have caught your quiet thief. The rubber seal at the bottom of the tank is failing, letting the pressured water slip underneath its rim unseen and unheard. To fix it, you do not need a mechanic. Turn the small oval valve on the chrome pipe behind the toilet clockwise until it stops tight to shut off the supply. Flush the tank once to drain the bulk of the water away. You will be left with about an inch of water in the very bottom, smelling faintly of clean porcelain and old lime. Reach your hand right down into that cold water and unhook the little rubber ears of the old flapper from the plastic pegs on the overflow tube. Undo the small brass or plastic chain linked to the flush lever. When you pull that old rubber flapper out into the light, rub your thumb across its underside. You will find it coated in a black, slimy film that stains your skin like charcoal grease. That is the rubber itself, softening and breaking down after 5 or 6 years of being drowned in water. Take a rough piece of cotton cloth and wipe the round plastic rim, the seat, where that flapper rests at the bottom of the tank. Many a beginner makes the mistake of putting a brand new flapper onto a dirty seat, and the tiny grit left behind keeps the new rubber from sealing. leaving the leak exactly as it was. Wipe it until the plastic feels as smooth as a polished stone. Slip the new flapper, a clean, bright red or blue piece of fresh rubber that smells like a new car tire, onto the pegs and hook the chain back to the lever. Give that chain just enough slack so it hangs with a tiny bit of drape when the handle is at rest. If you pull it too tight, it will hold the flapper up just a hair. If you leave it too loose, the handle won't lift the weight when you push it. Turn the wall valve back on, let the tank fill with a clean rush of water, and your quiet thief is banished for another 6 years. Now, let us move to the cellar, to the great iron cylinder that holds your hot water. This is a matter folks avoid because it looks formidable, but it is simpler than mending an old harness. Once a year, your water heater wants its belly cleared of grit. Over months and seasons, the hard minerals in your water, the lime, the calcium, the fine white crust, settle out as the water heats. They sink to the very bottom of the tank, forming a thick, gray sludge that sits right between the gas burner or electric element and the clean water above. If you do not clear it, you will begin to hear it. On a quiet night, you will hear a distinct popping and rumbling coming from the cellar floor, a sound like gravel turning over in a swift creek. That is the water trapped beneath that heavy layer of mineral sludge, boiling up into steam bubbles that pop as they force their way through the crust. It means your heater is straining, burning twice the fuel to heat the water through that gray stone blanket, and the metal bottom of the tank is overheating and weakening by the day to perform the yearly drain. You must first turn the power or gas dial on the front of the heater down to the pilot or off position. If you leave the fire on while the tank is empty, you will crack the glass lining of the tank or burn out the electric elements in 3 minutes flat. Attach a common green garden hose to the small brass drain valve at the very bottom of the heater. It looks just like the spigot on the outside of your house. Run the other end of that hose out to the driveway or down into a floor drain. Now, before you open that valve, listen to this warning, for it is where most folks ruin a good afternoon. That water inside is near 200 degrees hot. It will scald your hand to the bone if you treat it carelessly. Open the valve slowly with a flat blade screwdriver or by turning the plastic handle. At first, the water will flow sluggish and dark. You will see a heavy white and gray sand coming out of the mouth of the hose, a wet grit that feels rough and sharp between your fingers, like crushed eggshells. That is the scale that has been choking your heater. Let it run into a white 5-gallon bucket for a minute so you can see what is coming out. You will wonder how the machine boiled water at all through such a mess. To keep the water moving free, go up to the main floor and open the hot water tap on the kitchen sink. This lets air into the top of the lines so the tank can drain down without catching a vacuum, just like putting a vent hole in an oil barrel. Let it run until the water coming from the hose transitions from that cloudy, gritty sludge into a stream that is as clear and bright as the water from your kitchen tap. When the grit stops coming, close the bottom valve tight. Leave the kitchen faucet upstairs open while you turn the cold water inlet valve back on at the top of the heater. You will hear the tank fill with a heavy, hollow roar. Wait at the kitchen sink until the air spits and hisses out of the spout, followed by a steady, solid stream of cold water. Only when the air is fully gone and the tank is completely full can you safely turn the gas dial or the electric breaker back on. Do this once every autumn, and you will double the life of that expensive iron cylinder. Keeping your hard-earned money in your own pocket instead of giving it to the manufacturer for a new machine. The next thing to tend is behind the washing machine, a place where a hidden rot takes hold out of sight of the room. Pull that heavy machine 6 inches away from the drywall and look down at the 2 hoses that feed it. If they are the old, smooth, black rubber kind that came with the machine 10 years ago, you are looking at a loaded gun pointed straight at your floorboards. Those rubber lines stay under full house pressure every hour of the day and night. the rubber stretching and softening from the hot water inside until it begins to swell like a blister on a horse's heel. One night while you are asleep, that blister will let go, and 40 pounds of water pressure will begin pouring a full, unbroken stream onto your floor, running for 8 hours until you wake up to find your carpets floating. To prevent this, buy a pair of braided stainless steel hoses from the hardware store. They are gray, flexible lines encased in a mesh of woven steel wire that cannot swell or burst under any pressure your well can give. Turn the brass valves behind the washer tight to the right. Use a pair of pliers to turn the old black rubber hose nuts counterclockwise until they come free. You will find a small black rubber washer inside each end of the old lines, likely cracked and flattened into hard plastic. Take your new steel-braided lines and look inside the brass nuts. Ensure the fresh, soft black rubber washer is sitting flat inside the bottom of the threads. Thread the nut onto the copper valve by hand, turning it clockwise. Understand this: the threads on these hoses are not made to be jammed together by main strength. The brass threads merely hold the pipe steady, while that soft rubber washer inside does the real work of stopping the water. Twist the nut with your fingers until it sits snug against the valve. Then, take your wrench and give it exactly 1/4 turn more, no more than that. If you crank it down with all the strength of your arm, you will slice that soft rubber washer right in two against the sharp edge of the copper pipe inside, and the joint will begin to drip before the sun goes down. Turn the water back on and watch the joint for 5 minutes. If a tiny bead of water forms like a tear on the brass, give it just an inch more turn with the wrench until the weeping stops. With those steel lines in place, you can sleep easy through the hardest winter nights, knowing your laundry room is as dry and secure as the barn. Now, let us stop and think for a minute about why these simple things behave the way they do. There is no magic in a pipe, nor is there any mystery that cannot be laid bare by looking at how nature works when we aren't watching. Take that water heater we just spoke on. The reason that white grit settles out of the water isn't a matter of dirt getting into your well. It is a matter of heat changing the nature of the water itself. You see, the water traveling through the earth carries dissolved minerals, mostly calcium carbonate and magnesium. It holds them invisible, the way a hot cup of tea holds a spoonful of sugar dissolved into nothingness. But the moment that cold water hits the fiery base of your heater, the chemistry changes. Heat drives off the carbon dioxide gas that keeps those minerals dissolved. Without that gas, the calcium can no longer hold onto the water. It reverts back into a solid, forming tiny, hard white crystals. Think of it like a kettle on the stove. If you boil the same kettle every morning for a year, you will find a white, crusty shell growing along the inside bottom. In your water heater, millions of these tiny crystals fall through the water like a slow, silent snowstorm, landing on the steel bottom. Over 5 years, that snow turns into a hard, dense cake of limestone. The trouble here is a simple law of physics regarding how heat travels. Steel transfers heat beautifully, but that mineral scale is a natural insulator. It behaves just like a wool blanket or a layer of fire brick. When the gas flame roars to life beneath the tank, the heat cannot pass through that stone blanket into the water. Instead, the heat gets trapped inside the steel floor of the tank itself. The metal grows hotter and hotter, reaching temperatures it was never designed to bear until the steel begins to stretch, weaken, and crystallize. At the same time, the burner has to run twice as long to get your shower water warm, stealing your fuel while it destroys the tank. By flushing that white snow out before it bakes into stone, you keep the steel bare and the heat moving free. The same kind of natural law governs that water pressure we must watch. Think of your plumbing lines like the blood vessels in your own arm. Your heart pumps with a certain steady pressure to keep you alive. But if that pressure rises too high, the vessels strain and threaten to let go. In a house, 40 to 60 pounds of pressure is the sweet spot. It is enough force to push water up to the second floor basin and give a good, brisk wash, but gentle enough that the rubber washers and copper joints can hold it back without straining. When your well switch goes wrong, or the town water main pushes 90 or 100 pounds of pressure into your home, every single fitting begins to suffer. Water is heavy, and when you shut off a faucet quickly under high pressure, that heavy moving column of water slams to a sudden halt. The energy has to go somewhere, so it sends a shock wave through the copper. What the engineers call water hammer. That shock wave rattles the joints, stretches the braided lines behind your sink, and slowly works the threads loose. It is a silent destroyer because you cannot see the metal fatiguing behind the drywall until the day a joint cracks wide open. But I must give you the honest limit of these ways. For a man who promises a single cure for every ailment is either a fool or a salesman, and I am neither. You must understand where this traditional tending works and where it is completely useless. First, this yearly flushing of the water heater works wonderfully on standard tanks made of steel lined with glass, which is what most homes have used for 50 years. But if you have one of those modern, tankless, on-demand water boxes hung on the wall, this simple garden hose drain will not save you. Those tankless heaters do not have a big belly where sediment can settle. Instead, they pass the water through tiny, narrow copper ribbons wrapped around a fire. When scale forms inside those tiny tubes, it plugs them completely like a choked chimney. To clear that, you cannot just open a valve. You must use a specialized pump to circulate 3 gallons of warm virgin vinegar through the machine for an hour to dissolve the stone chemically. It is a different machine altogether, and it wants different minding. Furthermore, if your water heater has been sitting neglected in a dark cellar for 15 or 20 years without a single flush, and you hear it rumbling like a thunderstorm every time the water warms, do not go down there with a hose today. At that late stage, that thick bed of limestone may be the only thing holding the rusted bottom of the tank together. The metal beneath that scale has likely grown thin and brittle from years of overheating. If you go scraping that ancient stone away now, you may reveal a dozen tiny pinholes that the rust has eaten through the iron. And what started as a helpful chore will turn into a sudden flood that forces you to buy a new heater before nightfall. If a tank has been left untended for 2 decades, leave it be until it dies its natural death, and resolve to tend the next one rightly from its first autumn. The same honesty applies to your shutoff valves. If you find an old gate valve, the kind with the round iron wheel that screws down a brass wedge, and it has not been turned since the Nixon administration, do not force it with a long iron pipe or a heavy wrench. If you apply brute force to a frozen brass stem that has been corroded solid by 40 years of hard water, you will snap that stem right off inside the casting. Then you will have a valve that is stuck half open, unable to supply the house and unable to stop a leak, and you will be forced to cut the pipe out entirely. If it does not move with firm hand pressure or a gentle nudge from a small wrench, the time for preventive tending has passed. The valve must be cut out and replaced with a modern quarter-turn ball valve, which uses a smooth stainless steel ball that minerals cannot easily grip. Understand your limits and look at your pipes with an honest eye. We are seeking to maintain a sound house, not to perform miracles on a ruined one. The old ways are built on consistency, not force. They are the small, quiet habits of a man who looks at his homestead every season with an open mind, seeing the small trouble while it is still cheap and simple to manage. Now that we understand the pressure, the flow, and the limits of the materials under our feet, we are ready to look at how we handle the tools themselves when a joint does begin to weep. For the way a man holds his wrench and wraps his threads determines whether he cures the trouble or makes it twice as large. This way of tending the flow of water is no new invention, nor did it begin with the plumbers of our modern cities. If you look back into the old books, you will find that the people who built the first true water systems on this continent were driven by the exact same necessity that sits in our cellars today. In the early 1800s, when the Philadelphia Waterworks first began pushing water through hollowed-out log pipes beneath the city streets, the engineers quickly ran into a wall. The water from the Schuylkill River was full of lime and fine mountain silt, and within 3 winters, those wooden lines and the early iron boilers were choking to a sudden, rusty death. The men who solved it were not scholars with university degrees. They were the practical mechanics and blacksmiths who looked at the boilers of the early steam engines. In the historical records of the Franklin Institute, dating back to the 1830s, there are long, detailed reports written by early ironmasters on what they called the incrustation of steam boilers. They noted that if a man did not blow down the muddy water from the bottom of his iron vessel at the close of every week, the sediment would bake into a scale as hard as flint, causing the thick iron plates to crack and blow wide open under the pressure. The solution they found then is the exact same one we use on our water heaters today. The simple, regular flush that carries the mud away before the fire can cook it into stone. Even the modern agricultural bulletins published by our state universities confirm what the old-timers knew by plain experience. If you look at the extension reports from Penn State or the Ohio State University regarding rural water systems, the data is laid out in plain black and white. A 1/4 inch of calcium scale on the bottom of a water heating element increases the energy required to heat that water by nearly 40%. The science has not changed in 200 years. The only thing that changed is that we stopped reading the bulletins, and we forgot the simple work of our grandfathers' hands. Why do we live in a way that makes us strangers to our own walls? Why do we wait for the break and the great bill when the knowledge to keep a house sound has been bought and paid for by generations of men who came before us? Understand this: there is a quiet, steady freedom in being the person who knows the path of the water through his own ground. When you go down into your cellar this evening, do not look at your pipes as an enemy or a hidden mystery that you have no right to touch. Look at them as a piece of the earth that has been given to you to tend, stop, and think about how simple it truly is. You do not need a truck full of expensive tools, nor do you need thousands of dollars sitting in a bank account to secure your home against a sudden ruin. You need 10 minutes of an autumn afternoon, a bottle of cake coloring from the kitchen shelf, an ordinary green garden hose, and the willingness to look with your own eyes. It is an accessible thing, a small bit of knowing that belongs to any man or woman who is willing to take the weight of their own house onto their own shoulders. I invite you to try it yourself this very week. Do not wait for the day the water comes through your kitchen ceiling, and do not wait until the winter frost settles into the ground. Go find your main shut-off valve before the sun goes down tonight. Wipe the dust off the iron wheel and feel the weight of it in your hand. Test that toilet tank with the blue ink and see for yourself if you have a quiet thief drinking from your well while you sleep. There is a great respect to be paid to the old ways, not because they are old, but because they are true, and because they have kept the roofs of our people dry through 200 winters. A house is not kept by the great desperate repair when the ruin has already come. It is kept by the small faithful tending that keeps the ruin from ever showing its face. Let us return to that self-reliance. Let us mind and mend our own things, the way the old people always did, and pass a sound, dry house down to the ones who come after us. Now, I have given you the first part of this knowing, the part that looks ahead and stops the trouble before it can start. Next time, I want to show you what to do when a line does weep, and how a body can make a joint tight and true with his own 2 hands using nothing but a bit of flax and a simple wrench. But for today, go tend your valves, look to your hoses, and keep your home standing secure. I am Elias, and I will be here on this Lancaster County place, keeping up the old work until we speak again.